Welcome everyone to Creative Path Workshops and another Creative Cafe webinar. It's great to have all of you here. I am excited to be here tonight. I'm always honored and grateful for your time and attention. So thanks for being here once again. It's great to see a lot of familiar names. Jim Palmer in Virginia, Jeff in Arizona, Don in Victoria, BC, British Columbia, Charlotte, New York. Hello, everyone. Hello, Gary, Rick in San Diego. Welcome, welcome. Laurie in New Jersey, sorry. Peter in Burke, Virginia. Gail from Seattle. Yeah, awesome, awesome. Thank you all for joining tonight. Al in Wilmington, North Carolina. Pierre in Pennsylvania. George in Quebec. Howard. Hi, Howard in San Mateo, California. Welcome. Helen, just home. Helen from Australia. Awesome. Great to see you, Helen. Nina in Hampton. Madeline. Great, Madeline. Awesome. Yeah, so tonight is a Lightroom AMA, otherwise known as a Ask Me Anything. I'm going to attempt to answer all your questions that you have about Lightroom, particularly Lightroom 14, which is the version that came out just about 2 weeks ago. Not a lot has changed, just a few things. So it isn't really a huge upgrade. And also I did get a lot of questions submitted beforehand. Some of you used the form to submit questions. So perhaps I'll start with those, see how far we get, also with your questions tonight here. And then we'll see where it goes from there. And if I have time, maybe I'll get into showing you some editing tips on an image and perhaps try to use some of the new features if possible. Most of the new features really have to do with the generative AI. That AI is the thing now, right? That's the thing that seems to be making the most amount of news and waves everywhere. And that certainly is the case in Lightroom and in Photoshop and all the Adobe apps, to be fair. Remember, once again, if you would like to leave a question in the chat section where you guys are leaving your greetings, don't use that for questions. If you can, use the other section where there's a little circle with a person. Click on that, and then that area I see very easily, and I can see the questions that pop up there. In the normal chat section, I have to kind of filter through and find the questions, and sometimes I miss them. So I would hate to miss your question there. All right, so I think with that said, we will jump into the questions. The first two questions that I have are, I'm going to group them together. So one question is from Aj Jager. How come the latest Lightroom upgrade made everything so slow? And the second question is, what are the best ways to improve Lightroom performance? And so these two questions are related, of course. The first answer is, I don't know why Lightroom made things so slow for you. Personally, for me, the performance didn't really seem to get that much better, but I didn't notice a massive decrease in performance. But in terms of improving performance, which is something that we all would like, there are quite a few things that you can do to improve the efficiency of your system and perhaps optimize a few settings. So let me show you what some of those are. I'm going to go into the, let me switch my screen here. In Lightroom, I'm going to go into the catalog settings. And in general, in previews, one of the things you can do in the preview section of the catalog is to make sure that your preview size is appropriate for your monitor. If you're making the previews too large, then that is going to definitely slow things down. And typically, you'll see an auto entry here. And that means that Lightroom is detecting the size of your monitor in pixels. I'm on a 4K monitor here, so 4K monitor is 3,840 pixels wide by 2160 high. So that's what it's selecting here. If your monitor is a different size, just make sure that that's selected, but typically the auto would be best. So just check that. And then the preview quality, you have a couple of options here, low, medium, and high. And medium works well for most, in almost all cases. The preview, this preview size is the size of essentially the JPEG image that Lightroom creates for your raw files. And so that's the actual image that you see in your library. And if you make the preview quality high, that'll make a larger size preview, but that also may slow down your system. So for me, medium is fine. I'm fairly particular about what I see on my screen, and medium seems to work for me pretty well. One of the new features that was added in Lightroom version 14 is this option here, limit preview cache size. And what this is that if you are limited on hard drive space where you're storing your catalog and you don't limit your preview cache size, this can get pretty big. This is the catalog. There are a couple of files that go along with your catalog, and one of them is the cache file, and that can get really, really large. And if it takes up a lot of room on your hard drive, and your hard drive starts to get a little squeezed for space, that can actually slow your system down. If that's the case, you can always check this, and you can set a number here. Maybe 3 to 5 gigabytes is enough. And once it reaches 5 gigabytes, it'll then start to delete the old part of the cache, which will keep your hard drive from getting too full and slowing it down. I have plenty of space on my computer, so I don't need this checked. But I do have this automatically discard one-to-one previews after 30 days. That just means that the one-to-one previews, which are the ones that you see when you zoom in on your image, those will get discarded after 30 days for images potentially that I'm not zooming into anymore. If you need them back, all you have to do is basically double click on an image, zoom in, and Lightroom will build that one-to-one preview again like that. Okay, so this is the one-to-one preview. When you zoom in and you can look very carefully, this preview takes up a lot of room. That'll get discarded after 30 days. Again, just to manage your the size of your catalog and its associated files. Another setting you can check for performance is if you go into the preferences. In the preferences area, there's a tab for performance. And there are a lot of different settings here that you can perhaps adjust to gain more performance. So the first thing is you want to make sure that you're using your graphics processor. If you're on a PC, that's going to be your dedicated video card. If you're on a Mac, typically this would be chosen automatically, but make sure that this either says auto. Make sure that it never says off. For whatever reason, if it's off, put it on auto, because off means it's not using your graphics card, in which case it's putting all the load on the CPU, and that's definitely going to slow things down. So just something to check. Another setting that can improve your performance is the camera raw cache size. And I think this is set to maybe 20 or 30 by default by Adobe, but I would definitely increase this if you've got the storage space on the drive that you store your images. I have mine up to 50 gigabytes. Again, this is the cache file that Lightroom uses when it's reading from your raw files. And the bigger you make this, the less it has to go into the raw files themselves. It uses the cache. It's kind of a quicker way to access memory. And so, again, this has a big potential performance factor for your system. So if you've got the hard drive space on either internally or where you're storing your images, raises up to 40 or 50 and see how that helps. Another option for improving performance, if you are struggling with that, is this feature here. Use smart previews instead of originals for image editing. And I have this checked because I'm not on the latest and greatest computer. It's a couple years old. And what this does is that it basically uses the smart previews that you can build in your catalog for editing instead of the original raw file. The downside is it says that you may experience decreased quality when editing. Again, I haven't really noticed that. When you print, when you export, it's always going to access the original file, but for editing purposes, it may help with improving performance. There's 2 steps to this. You have to check this first. So you have to check use smart previews, and then you have to make sure that you actually have smart previews built for the images that you're working with. I'll come around to that in a moment. So I have this checked. If, again, performance is a problem, I would try this. Check this here. You definitely always want to keep your catalog optimized. This is something that you should do regularly, perhaps every couple of weeks. And so you can do that here in the preferences, and optimizing the catalog just makes sure that everything is in the right place and it prevents perhaps corruption. So that's something that I do fairly often. However, you can also access that right from the menu here, the file menu, and you can see here in the file menu or in the Lightroom Classic menu, if you're on a Mac, you'll see here that it says Optimize Catalog. That's a second place that you can do this, okay? The other place that you can do it, or that you can have Lightroom prompt you to do it, is if we go back to Catalog Settings, and you go to the General tab in Catalog Settings, you'll see here that you have an option of when you want Lightroom to prompt you to do a backup. And I have mine set to every time Lightroom exits. I don't normally have it that way. I think I might have it this way because of a previous demo that I did or what have you. I usually have this set on once a week when exiting Lightroom. But the point is, whether you have it every time it exits or once a week, when you quit Lightroom, a dialog will open and it'll ask if you want to do a backup. And there's a checkbox in there that will say Optimize Catalog. You always want to have that checked. You can't optimize your catalog too much. Again, that just helps with preventing issues with your catalog and future corruption, things like that. Now, as far as the smart previews are concerned, there's two ways that you can make sure you have smart previews for the images you're working with. The first way is when you import images. I'm going to open up the import dialog here. And let me hide my camera so you guys can see. There we go. When you import images, let's assume or let's imagine that I'm importing images and I have them all here. You see on the right-hand side here, of course, you'll have a lot more things here when you're importing, destination, where you want to save it, etc. But at the top, you'll have here build previews 1-to-1, and I usually have this at 1-to-1 so that when I'm first importing images, I'm most likely going to be zooming in on many of them to see detail and make sure that the images are sharp. But right below that, you see that I have build smart previews checked, and that'll build smart previews for all the images that you import. And then when you actually go through and work with the images, you'll take advantage of the increased performance if you have that setting that I mentioned before in the preferences, which is to use the smart previews for editing. Now, let's say you don't have smart previews, or let's say you want to find out if you have smart previews enabled. Well, let's say I select this image here, or let's select this one here, it'll say over here, right on the right-hand side underneath the histogram, you see it says original photo, but it doesn't say smart preview. And for images that do have a smart preview, it should normally say smart preview. I'm pretty sure that I built a smart preview for this image, and it's still not showing that. So this could be potentially some kind of bug in this version of Lightroom. This is, again, as I mentioned, 14.01, I believe. But if you want to build smart previews, let's say I wanted to build smart previews for these first 8 images. I select them all like that. You go up to the you go up to the library menu and come down to previews, and you can say build smart previews. And you can see that it says building smart previews. Supposedly it built them. When I click on the image, I still don't see the smart preview over here. So I'm not exactly sure why it's not showing it. Usually it would show it here. It would say original photo plus smart preview. So I would have to look into that at some point. One other thing you can do in terms of increasing performance is, if possible, it's preferable to keep your catalog on the fastest drive that you have. And that optimally could be an SSD or even an NVMe drive, which is basically based on a chip. An SSD is a solid state drive. The difference between an SSD and an NVMe is that they connect to different places in your computer. The NVMe connects to a faster bus. But regardless, an SSD drive, which is essentially a solid state drive that doesn't have any moving parts, is much faster than your traditional spinning drive, whether it's a 3.5-inch drive or 2.5-inch drive, the hard drives that we are all familiar with. If you move your catalog only, so you can keep your raw files where they are, because the potential slowdown with Lightroom isn't in reading the raw files, it's in constantly accessing the catalog. Because remember, every time you make a change in Lightroom, right? You guys know there's no saving. Every time you make a change, whether it's an adjustment to an image or saving something, anything, it's constantly reading and writing to the catalog. And if you've got your catalog on a faster drive, like an SSD or faster, that can also potentially speed up your whole workflow. So if you are, let's say, for example, you have a computer that has a built-in SSD drive, and you've got an external drive where you're storing all of your raw files, and perhaps on that external drive you also have your catalog, and that external drive is your conventional spinning drive, right, with spinning hard drives. You can try just moving the catalog, and the catalog is going to be inside of a folder. Easiest way to find your catalog is you go up to, once again, the catalog settings, and you go here to General. Here's information. You see location. Here's my catalog. And if I click on Show, it'll open up a window showing me the catalog. Your catalog is inside of a folder. Okay, so you can see here RRJR Master Catalog. And if I open up that folder, there's a whole bunch of different files in here, including backups. What you want to do is you want to take this entire folder, not when Lightroom is open, but when you quit when Lightroom is closed, you take this folder and you copy it to your SSD drive, potentially your internal drive. And then once you copy it to your internal drive, when you open up Lightroom, you make sure that you open that version of the catalog. In other words, you don't want to reopen again the one that's on your external. You just come up to the file menu and you just say open catalog. It'll ask you to choose a catalog to open, and then you select a copied one that you put on your internal SSD. And all the links to your raw files will remain intact, because if you stay on the same computer, it's still going to be pointing to the same drive. So it's an absolute link. If you're keeping on an external drive called My Raw Files, it's still going to find them in My Raw Files. It's just the catalog file that's in a different location, and potentially that may help with performance. So you can give that a shot. Okay, another question from Andrew Geller. Can you go over some of the recent changes to the Remove tool? And his second question is, are you aware of any glitches using Lightroom with the latest Apple OS Sequoia? So the second question first, I am not aware of any glitches with the latest Mac OS that came out, once again, about 2 weeks ago. I generally recommend that you wait a couple of, a month or so before upgrading your Mac OS if you are, if you're really concerned about Lightroom, just to make sure that there aren't any bugs or anything that pop up. Typically, you'll hear about them pretty quickly. Apple is pretty good about upgrading Mac OSs with anything that they find right away. Same thing with iOS, and same thing with Lightroom. Lightroom 14 was released, and I think within a couple of days it was a 14.01 for something that they missed. I have experienced issues in the past, for example, where I noticed that when I'm printing, all of a sudden, this happened to me once, where colors changed somewhat. I found a discrepancy between the monitor and the print, and nothing, absolutely nothing had changed in my system, except for I had done a Mac OS upgrade. And that Mac OS upgrade, which I thought would really not have any effect on the color management aspect, but it sure does, because color management is a part of the operating system. That changed something. I don't remember exactly where it was updated, whether Adobe provided an update or Apple did, but then it got fixed. So just be aware of that. As far as the new features to the Remove tool, I'm going to go through the new features in Lightroom 14, including that. So when I go through that, then I'll I'll get around to that, and we'll look at that. Okay, next question from Al Rodis. I hope I'm pronouncing the name properly. I use Photoshop 2025 and was wondering if Lightroom has any features that are not available in Photoshop for an amateur like me. The Lightroom catalogs are a pain, and I would like to avoid dealing with them. Well, I would say that the potential downsides of using Lightroom and its database system, which is essentially what Lightroom is. The catalog is essentially a database that you add information to, and then it then manages your images. The potential downsides of that, and there can be potential hassles, are far outweighed, for me, in my opinion, by the tremendous advantages that gives you. So, for example, just in terms of efficient image management and organization, right? When you have a system where it keeps track of all your images and where they are, you don't have to go hunting through your folders to find an image. They are in a database that you can search, that you can keyword, that you can create virtual collections. Impossible to do using physical folders on a hard drive. You can put the same image in multiple virtual collections. There's no way you can do that using Photoshop. Things like batch editing images. Okay, so if I've got one image and then I've got 8 other images that are similar, maybe the same scene and the same situation, just slight adjustments, I can edit the first one and apply those edits to the other 7, to the other 20, whatever it is. I can do a quick batch edit. All those images now have those adjustments, and I can modify each individually if I like. That is a huge time saver, regardless of whether you're a professional or an amateur. We all got a finite amount of time that we should be trying to optimize. So I'd rather spend as much time as possible in the field and enjoying my work versus doing a lot of management. Exporting options out of Lightroom are much more, let's say, flexible, and in terms of workflow, much easier, because you can save export presets, different ways that you want to export your images. You can have them in different sizes and different resolution sizes, and different formats. Again, in Photoshop, you have to go image by image by image, and you constantly have to make those adjustments, develop presets, and finally, right, all the other things in Lightroom, like the print module, being able to take your raw file from import into the develop module and then go directly to print, creating books. So I would suggest that perhaps you take a second look at maybe what you'll gain from using Lightroom and the catalog. It may be a little bit of a learning curve at first, but I know that I definitely could not go back to using a non-database system where I'm just simply looking for my files spread across my folders. The convenience and the flexibility to search for anything by rating, by keyword, by person's name. If you add names to the pictures that you want to be able to pull up, are vastly superior and save me a lot of time. Quite honestly, I'm letting the computer do more work for us, letting the technology do more work for us, which leaves us more work to do the things that we really enjoy doing versus a lot of this tedious managing. So that would be my suggestion. Perhaps give it another try, maybe experiment, and with a small catalog, you don't have to commit right away, and see what you learn from that. Okay, let's see, what do we have next here? Okay, questions from Helen Marriott. Which color tools can we use in conjunction with masking? So that's a great question. Let me see if I can show you some examples here. So I'm going to go into any image here. Let's pick this image. I'm going to go into Develop module. And let me just go to any mask that I have here. So here's a mask that I have for the foreground. Okay. So you can see that it's a linear gradient that is applied on the foreground here. And Ellen wants to know, what color adjustments do we have for the masks? So there's a few different color adjustments. On this mask here, I'm actually just applying some clarity and not much else. So I can play with the color and it won't affect what I'm doing here. All of the local adjustments, you get with any of the local adjustments, you get access to all of these different controls, these different types of adjustments. A lot of them are similar, if not the same, as the ones that we get in the global adjustments. So for example, we got our tone controls. I'm going to close that down because we're talking about color here. And we've got curve. I'm going to close that one down. I'm going to close down the effects, and I'm going to close down detail. So we essentially have two different areas. One is the color adjustments here, and then one is the point color adjustment, which is very similar, if not the same, as the one that we have in the global adjustments. So in terms of color, we have temperature, so I can cool off the foreground. I can warm the foreground, and I'm doing that, again, we're just applying a color temperature to this linear gradient. I can change the tint. Okay, and the tint basically shifts it more towards green or more towards magenta. And I can also adjust the hue of the color. And this is a kind of a strange adjustment to use. It can be a little bit finicky, but if I click on this and I drag to the left or right, that'll change the hue in a very strong, direct way of the color. So this makes it redder, and this will make it greener. Okay, and so that's those three color adjustments that we have. This here is making fine adjustments to this hue slider because it can move very quickly. So you can see how you can move it a lot more slowly now. All right, so generally speaking, I use the color adjustments here for changing the overall feel of a local area of an image. Okay, so in this case, it's the foreground. If I want to make the foreground a little bit cooler, I can drag the temperature to the left and warmer to the right. And then these are more finer color adjustments, as I showed before. You also have saturation. So this is a very important one as well. We can desaturate the color in the foreground, or we can increase the saturation. Now, we also have this area here, which is kind of hidden and not easily noticeable, but this area here called color, you'll see here there's a little sort of rectangle here. If I click on that rectangle, we get this color selector, and what this allows us to do is to add a tint to the mask. So you could think of this like kind of like the split toning that was in Lightroom before, and now it's been renamed to color grading. It just adds a tint to the mask. And so, for example, I can hover around here and I'll select the color. Let's say I select this yellow here. And now you'll see that I get this warm overlay, and you can adjust the saturation of that tint. That makes it very strong. This takes it off completely. And if I put it back to 100%, and I drag here, this changes the intensity of that color. So you can see how it gets very sort of washed out, or this makes it very strong. Not so easy to notice here because this image already has a lot of sort of color in it. So I'm going to, let me go to a different image and show you a little bit better. Let's go to this image here. If I add a linear gradient to this image, once again, and I drop it down like that, and I come over to this color section again, I click on this little chip. You see here now that if I click on yellow, it's added a kind of a warmish tint to that area. And dragging it this way makes it cool. You see how it's making it cooler, but I can basically choose any color to add a tint. So look how much red we have up here. It's like a color tint that we're adding over the image. Here's blue, here's over to magenta. this is actually quite useful, and I use this once in a while when I have an image, a part of an image that is very white because it's been blown out, and I can't recover it, and I may want to add a little bit of warmth to that. I might use this just to add a tiny bit of warmth to that area that's been blown out. But again, very specific use case. And once again, with this linear gradient, here's the cooling of the sky, and here's the warming of the sky. Now we also have the point color adjustment, and the point color adjustment allows us to select a specific color. And so the way we do that, select a specific color and modify that color. So in this case, let's say I wanted to select, just wanted to adjust the blue. So even though my linear gradient is applied along the entire top of the image, let's say I only wanted to affect the blue and leave this alone, I could use point color. So we select the eyedropper here, and we have to sample a color or a range of colors, and you can do that by just clicking, and you can see that it adds the swatch here. And then once we have that color selected, then we can apply adjustments to it, and those adjustments we apply by opening this little triangle. Well, the adjustments are here, I'm sorry. Here are the adjustments. Down here we have a way to refine the color that we selected. So let's see if we've got the color that we want. The way you do that is you click on this visualize range, and whatever remains in color, it shows you what color has been selected. Whatever goes black and white is not being selected for. So you'll notice that when I clicked on this visualize range, the sky remained blue, but notice that our trees and rocks here are now not green anymore. They are essentially monochromatic. That means that we've selected for the right color, which is blue. So now if I come over here to these adjustments, I can darken the sky. Notice that when I darken the sky, there's no change being done to the trees and the rocks. I can brighten the sky. I can add more saturation, less saturation, and I can change the hue of the blue in our mask. That's essentially what we're doing. We're saying only adjust the blue based on this swatch of the area that we have this mask. These adjustments here just allow us to refine that range in case we're selecting more colors than what we want. And you can drag these around to select, less saturation or more saturation. Again, this is refining the mask, not making any adjustments. The adjustments are done up here in the shift, whether it's a hue shift, a saturation shift, or luminosity shift. All right, so those are the basic color adjustments that we can do to an image using the local masks. And there are quite a few. So you can see that you can get very involved, and there are typically more than one way to get at a solution. You can come at it from different directions, right? If you want to warm something up, you can potentially use the temperature slider, or you can use the hue to make it a little bit warmer. My experience has been that there's usually one way that tends to look more natural, that tends to be more, that gets you closer to what you're looking for without it looking over-processed or overworked. The temperature slider for me does a lot of work because that subtle shift between warm and cool is maybe what you're looking for. And the point color is a very precise way to access a color within a mask. In this image, for example, if I wanted to darken the sky in this image, I wouldn't use a linear gradient. I would just use a sky mask, and the sky mask would select the sky, and then I don't have to worry about the trees over here. But I just wanted to illustrate how that works in this kind of mask. And then a second question from Helen is, can I copy all the settings that I originally set up for my main Lightroom catalog on my desktop for other occasional practice on a laptop without carrying over all the large catalog? So I think what Helen is asking is if you've got your catalog on your computer, on your main computer, your main desktop, that's your official catalog, and you want to have a copy of that catalog somewhere else perhaps on a laptop so that you can practice on it in some way, some way, but you don't want to deal with actually having to copy over all of the raw files. And the answer is yes. The very easy way to do that is it's 2 steps. First, if you want to move all your images over, okay, and basically all we're going to be moving over is the previews, the smart previews. That's another use for the smart previews. By the way, I'm just going to pause here for a moment. You'll notice that with this image selected, now it is saying smart preview over here. That's what I was looking for before. So you see here that when you've got smart previews built for your image, it'll say original plus smart preview. Before that wasn't there. So just pointing that out. Okay, so you select all photographs in your catalog, and then you come up to the file menu, and you can select here, export as catalog. Okay, when you select this, you'll get this dialog. All right, and it'll ask you to select where you want to export the catalog to, and so you select someplace, either an external hard drive, supposedly a hard drive that you're going to connect to your laptop. But the key down here is, and this is very important, you want to uncheck export negative files. If you uncheck export negative files, that essentially means your raw files, then it'll export the entire catalog with previews. You can see here that it says include smart previews, and it also gives you an option build include smart previews. So I would check both of these, but leave the export negative files unchecked. What that will do is that it will make a copy of your catalog with all of the images at a destination of your choosing, an external hard drive, for example, but it won't move over any of the raw files. So you'll wind up with a folder on this external drive that has your catalog and a few other files with all the previews. You can then open that catalog on your laptop, and you'll be able to actually see all your images and practice with it. What you won't be able to do is you won't be able to, not easily anyway, you won't be easily able to sync any changes you make on that catalog back to the main catalog. Even as I think about that, that won't be easy at all. I'm not even sure how you would do that without thinking about it some more. But if you want something just for practice, where whatever you do on that external catalog won't impact, or it won't, you don't need to replicate that back in your main catalog, that would be the way to do it. Okay, a few questions from Renee. Should your color space be set on ProPhoto RGB for external editing? Great question, Renee. And yes, absolutely. So Renee is talking about up here, if we come to preferences, and if we come to the external editing tab, you see here that you have an option for a couple of options when you send an image from Lightroom to Photoshop to do some editing, etc., and then you save it back into Lightroom. So first, you have the option for the file format, PSD or TIFF. Either one is fine. They're both fully compatible and will carry over all your adjustments. I like PSD because it just reminds me that it's a Photoshop file. The next one is color space, and you certainly want ProPhoto RGB. Why? Because ProPhoto RGB is the largest color space that exists, and it will preserve all of the colors that are contained in your original raw file that exists in the raw file. The color space that is used in Lightroom is very similar to ProPhoto RGB, a very large one. That's the idea, to preserve all of the colors that come from your camera sensor. So Lightroom isn't going to compress your color space or anything like that, because you wouldn't want that. You want to preserve as much as possible. But when you send it out of Lightroom to another application, it needs to know what color space to use. And ProPhoto is very similar, as I said, to the color space in Lightroom, meaning you won't lose any colors. If by any chance, by any accident, this was set to something like sRGB, sRGB is the smallest color space that exists. That's the one that's used on the web and anywhere online. Very, very small color space, which means that a lot less colors, and colors that exist in your original file that don't exist in the small sRGB color space are going to be not discarded completely, but they're going to be compressed down to the smaller number of colors. If you have this set to sRGB and you send your image to Photoshop, and then you make some adjustments and you send it back to Lightroom, it comes back into Lightroom with the smaller color space. You can't regain those lost colors back. So I definitely suggest keeping this on ProPhoto RGB. And the idea is these are your negatives, right? These are your negative files. You want to keep them in the most original, pristine state possible until you export for the internet or the web, and in which case now you're creating a copy as a JPEG and something like that. Okay. So yeah, great question. Everything else here, 16 bits, yes, 16 bits definitely better than 8. Again, more information being sent, and resolution, you could just ignore that because we're going from one digital application to another. So there's no resolving of the information like we do when we're printing. So ProPhoto and 16-bit is the best settings to preserve the quality of your images. Hope that answers your question, Renee. Ben says, I see you're including in your catalog iPhone images and DSLR. Are you downloading from your phone and mixing them into your folder? I guess to further expand, do you use mobile version of Lightroom or just the desktop version? Great question, Ben. And that can get us into some fairly, we can go down the rabbit hole with this topic easily because it is kind of complex. But to answer your question, I'm going to answer the question. If you don't quite follow along, then hopefully in the future, I will do a webinar where we really look at the Lightroom cloud ecosystem in more detail. But yes, I do have the Lightroom app on my phone and my iPad, but mostly in my phone where I'm making my images. And I have my Lightroom Classic catalog syncing to the cloud. And you can see that right up here in the top right-hand corner. You see it's green. If I click on this, you see that it says synced. And so if I take an image, if I make an image with the Lightroom app on my phone, it automatically syncs it to the cloud, and that automatically syncs it to my Lightroom catalog. And yes, I'm keeping all of my images in the same catalog, all RAW files, regardless of what camera they came from. For me, an iPhone RAW file is just as legitimate as a Canon RAW file, regardless of quality and things like that. But they're all RAW files, so I want to keep them in one place. This way, I'm not having to manage multiple, sources of files. If I have an image on my iPhone that I did not shoot with the Lightroom app, for example, if I'm using the built-in camera app or perhaps a third-party app like Halide or Pro Camera, something like that, then usually that's saved to the Photos app, otherwise known as the camera roll, and you can use the Lightroom app on your phone to import from the camera roll. When you import from the camera roll into Lightroom, once again, it will sync to the cloud, and that comes down to my Lightroom Classic catalog. I also use the desktop app on my computer for Lightroom for different reasons, I suppose. Maybe if I want to just see what I have in the cloud, or for teaching purposes, things like that. But for me, the bulk of my work happens in Classic, and I want everything in Classic, including my cloud pictures that I'm making with my phone, etc. Right. Next question is from Cheryl. How long should I figure an external drive will last? I had a G-Tech external drive for a number of years. I'd rather get a new one than risk this one getting corrupted. Any sense on how long hard drives last? There's an old adage that says it's not a question of if, but when. So the longer you have it, the higher your probability will go up, your risk will go up that something will happen to it. At the same time, I've heard of folks who have had a drive for a couple of months and it crashes. I've been lucky in my 20 plus years of using, maybe longer of using hard drives. I've had a couple of crashes. Before my photography career, I spent a lot of time in music, using digital recording systems that also used hard drives, and I didn't have a lot of crashes, but I also try to buy the best quality hard drives. I'd rather pay up front than pay later. So I stay away from the, kind of the home casual use drives and try to buy the drives that are meant for network or video purposes that tend to be much more reliable. So I would say if you're having hesitation, just get another one for safety. G-Tech is great. I haven't seen G-Tech in a while. I haven't been on their website. I'm not sure what they're selling these days, but I've always told folks to, my drives have almost always come from OWC, stands for Other World Computing. You can also find them, you can either do a search for Other World Computing in Google or search for Mac sales. And they make phenomenal drives. By the way, even though they mostly sell for Mac, they also, the drives will work with Windows because they're either USB-C based or some kind of standard protocol like that. And they make fantastic drives, great customer support. They sell RAIDs, they sell all kinds of configurations. So I can't recommend them highly enough. Okay, a question from Gail. It was recently recommended to me to replace my desktop with a gaming computer because of a better graphics card for editing. What do you think of that? I would agree with that. Gaming systems, all that really means is that gamers want maximum performance. Gamers want fast processing, fast memory, and particularly fast video performance, powerful video performance. So I think that's a great idea. On the PC that I'm on now, it's completely spec'd out as if it were a gaming PC. And I've been known to dabble in some games here and there together with my son. But sure, you need graphics performance to drive any graphics intensive program like Lightroom, like Photoshop, like video editing. So for sure, that's a good recommendation. What you're going to see with gaming PCs is that, you know, it's the performance and the components inside are going to be the same as if someone were buying them for video editing. The gaming PCs tend to be a little flashier, a little more aesthetically pleasing to, you know, someone who's into games. But you can get a standard PC and make sure that you've got high-end parts in it. For example, you know, NVIDIA graphics cards are the top of the line in terms of performance. Get the best CPU you can get and get the fastest memory. And that's really all that is. It's just a question of, it's just a matter of prioritizing performance over, you know, cost. Really, it's the thing that's the thing you're going to it's going to balance out. The cheaper it is, the slower, the faster, the more expensive. Okay, any other questions here? Okay, I have a few other questions here that came in. What's the best way to export images for the web? So pretty straightforward one. If I select this image here, actually to go here, the same one again, I'm going to go up to File, Export. And typically, in terms of the web, the thing you want to be watching out for is this area here. So for example, File, Settings, you want to select JPEG. Quality can be anywhere from 60 to 80, depending on, you know, how big or small you want the file to be. If size is not an issue, then go with 80. If you want them to keep them smaller, go with 60. Color space, this is something that we looked at previously when we talked about color space for sending out to Photoshop. Here's where you want your color space to be sRGB so that the colors appear properly in, you know, online, Facebook, etc. And this is a copy of your file, so it doesn't change your raw file at all. And then that's basically it here. You don't have to change anything else. So that's what I would recommend. There's a few other settings here like watermarking. There's sharpen. That's the one I missed there. Sharpen for screen. I always check this. You can also sharpen for paper in case you're exporting for printing. But I usually just select screen here, and then amount is standard. And that's just a common sharpening amount. For when you compress the file down to the size here, you know, depending on what size you need to export it at. So for example, this here, I'm exporting at 1920 by 1080. That's a typical HD monitor size, so that if I put it on a TV set, it'll fill the screen. And resolution, again, doesn't really matter here because if you're going from one digital device to another, we're just talking about pixels. So if you're going from Lightroom to a TV or an iPad or an iPhone, it's just how many pixels you need to fill the screen, right? So those are the common export settings. Lightroom does have some presets that you can play with here for email, for DNG, etc. But I use this extensively for all kinds of places that I export my images to, whether it's my website, Instagram, for commercial jobs that I do, customers that typically want a size all the time for my newsletter. I got one for email, for my blog. And this makes exporting images really fast because I select 5 images. I don't even come into this window. I select 4 images for my newsletter, for example. I come up here to File, Export with Preset, and I select the preset. There it is for my newsletter. I already know that that puts it into a particular folder on my hard drive called the newsletter. And boom, there they are. And that just speeds up the workflow tremendously. I just wanted to get into very quickly, we got a little bit, maybe 10 more minutes, and then I'll answer your question I'll answer Gail's question about monitor brightness. But just about the new features, there aren't that many. So I already talked about the option to limit your cache size in the catalog settings. Denoise, which is Lightroom's AI-driven noise generation algorithm, now supports linear RAW files, including Apple Pro RAW files. That was not the case before. Now it does. So you can actually remove noise. You can use the denoise function with Apple Pro RAW files. That's another reason why I like to bring my files into Classic. I believe the desktop version also supports now denoise. I'm not sure, but Classic definitely does. One other option that I find very useful is now, for the first time ever, in Lightroom, you can actually come over to the File menu and you can rename your catalog. Before, you had to go into the Explorer or Finder and rename it, and then you had to tell Lightroom to, excuse me, open up this catalog. Now you can actually rename the catalog within Lightroom. So this is a welcome addition because you can give it your own nice custom name and take all those numbers away from the end that it's been adding every time it does an update, right? 0.2, 0.2, 0.2, whatever it is. So that's kind of convenient. There's another thing about another feature called content authenticity. That's Adobe's attempt at trying to, I guess, protect the integrity of images and their owners. So you can actually make your images so that if someone tries to tamper with the information, you can actually see that it's been tampered with. Just a way to, as they claim, they're trying to combat misinformation. So that might be useful if you have that. You need that kind of protection. Smart albums on the desktop. But the other one I just want to mention quickly is the generative remove. And that'll also give me a chance to talk about something I discovered with an image of a good friend of mine, Hillel, here. So I'm going to open up this image, and if I'm going to go to D for develop, and I'm going to press Q, which is the shortcut for the remove tool. It used to be called the healing tool before, and at one time it was the spotting tool, but now they've called it remove. And the only change that they've made is that you've got this remove tool, which is the one that can use the generative AI. You've got the heal tool from before, and we've got the cloning tool from before. And the changes that they made, they changed this from object aware to detect objects. All this really does is that it allows you to be a little sloppier with selecting something, and it'll kind of detect the object that you want to remove. Okay. But what I wanted to show you was a very interesting problem that I ran into with this image recently, which is that we wanted to remove these branches here. In fact, I already have a remove attempt here. So let me click on this and I'll press delete. And so here's the image, and we've got this branch sticking into the right, and we want to use the remove tool with generative AI to remove it. So I'm going to make my brush a little bigger, make sure that this is checked, generative remove. I'm going to drag around this, select it like that. And once you've got your selection, you come over here to the right. You can modify your selection if you need to. You can add to it or subtract from it, but I'm pretty happy with that. I click on remove. AI does its thing. Let me take away my camera there. And you'll see that after doing that, we still have a little piece of the branch there. And really that struck me as quite odd, because that was a very clean, simple selection that we wanted to do. And even if I go through the variations here, so when you use generative remove, Lightroom gives you a few variations to see which one works better for your needs. And even if I click on the other two, there's number 2, different kind of branch. There's number 3, okay? But none of these are removing the branch. And this really was perplexing to me because it works so wonderfully in so many other situations. That's until I realized that, and I'm going to select this again to remove our tool. That's until I realized that this image is cropped. And if I press R to bring up the crop, you'll see that there's more to this image that extends outside the crop. And so that is the original image to the edge. And I suspect that what's happening is that because we're using the remove tool only on this end of the branch, that it's confused perhaps, right? It doesn't, or maybe not confused, it's saying, well, obviously he doesn't want to remove the whole thing because he's only selecting part of it. So maybe he wants a different kind of branch on the end of this tree. That was the problem. And so if I go back to the remove now and I select the entire thing, like so, this should be fairly straightforward, and it is, once it knows that you want to remove everything. All right, that's what I was expecting. That's a perfect job, and now we can come back and come back to our original crop. All right, so just something to be aware of in terms of generative remove is that, and this may be the case with other things, though I haven't seen that. So for example, if I press R, and we can try this now. If I press R and I reset the crop and I apply a vignette, and now I adjust my crop, you'll see that the vignette adjusts to the crop size. So in some cases, the effects will sort of adhere to the crop, but in the generative remove case, anyway, it's not doing that. So if you're using generative remove, it's basically taking into account the entire image. So that's something that can catch you off guard if you're not aware of that or looking out for that. So that's just something to be mindful of. Otherwise, it works pretty straightforward, and I've been using it more and more for small things. For example, here's an image where I didn't get around to adjusting this image or developing the image, but here's an area down here where would be a perfect case scenario where this little tiny rock just snuck into the bottom left-hand corner there. Press Q, that brings up generative remove. I can simply do that. Click on remove. And well, that is a little unexpected. However, we do have some variations. So that's variation number 1. I can click on that. That's number 2. And that's number 3. None of those I really like. It might be that I need to select a bigger region. So let's try this again. Let me go a little bit further out. And it does suggest that you select a little bit bigger than what you need. Now I'll click on remove. That's number 1. That's number 2. That's a little better. That's number 3. None of those I'm particularly happy with, but you get the idea. It depends on the context that's there. In fact, let me try one more time and then we'll call it a night. I'm going to delete this one. Let's try without the generative AI. All right, and you can refresh here to see if it gives us a different effect. So again, not that much better. It depends. I have edited this image before, and when I use a generative remove, it actually worked out perfectly. So to give you just a quick preview, I was going to work on this image. It ultimately became a black and white, but here's the black and white version. And you can see when I used generative remove, that's the effect that I got when I used it previously. So it's not always consistent. And I don't recall having to do it 3 or 4 or 5 times when I did it the first time. I think I maybe applied it once and tried a variation, and it just gave me the water there. So it's one of those things where it depends on the context, okay? But this was the image that I wanted to show in terms of before and after. This is from my iPhone using an app called Spectre, which allows you to do long exposures handheld. So it basically takes a bunch of images over a period of 2 or 3 seconds, blends them all together, and gives you a long exposure. Amazing stuff that I could never imagine doing many years ago. So, all right. So I think that about does it for us tonight. Monitor brightness for editing. Yes, I think monitor brightness, the best setting is something like 120 candelas. If you use a calibration tool, you can set it. You can find that adjustment. 120 tends to be a good place for photography. It's not too bright, not too dark. Your eyes get adjusted to it. That's what I use all the time. And even though I have a lot of lights here, I can see my monitor fine. Your eyes calibrate. The important thing is that I can work for longer periods of time. You can work for longer periods of time with a reduced brightness and not get eye fatigue. Also, you will tend to make better adjustments for printing because it won't be so bright, and your print won't be competing against this really bright monitor if you have it set to its maximum. And today's monitors can get really bright. So again, that's something you can set with your any decent calibration tool. All right, guys. So thank you very much again for attending tonight. I really appreciate it. Always lots of fun. And hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully you learned a few things. I'm always happy to answer your questions afterwards. You can email me, and I'm happy to follow up with anything that perhaps wasn't clear or I didn't explain as well as I could have. I'm always trying to get better at explaining things and make it as clear and simple as possible for you to understand, because that makes it easy for me to understand as well. We're all learning in this together. So thanks again, and I will see you in the next one. Take care. Have a good night.